Welcome to the PennCLO Podcast, The Practitioner Scholar. I'm very excited today to speak with Dr. Phillip Ellis, who is one of the chapter authors in our new book, Leaders as Architects of Change, Designing Organizations for Connection and Resilience in Times of Uncertainty. The book is co-edited by myself and Dr. Raghu Krishnamurti, the director of the CLO program at the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education. Phillip, I'm really excited to talk to you today. And before we get to talking to the substance of your chapter, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Well, let me start by saying I'm really excited about the conversation too, Sharon. It's good. You and I know each other well, so it's amazing to hear you have like your podcast voice on here. I feel like this is going to be a great conversation, and I know we're good friends, and I'm really excited about this conversation. And thank you for having me on. Just as a quick introduction, so I'm obviously a graduate of the Penn Chief Learning Officer program. My background really has been I live in Washington D.C., so I'm based outside of Washington D.C. Most of my background has been in the nonprofit space, mostly in the environmental and social justice space. I'm a consultant, and I'm really passionate about helping to build communities around people that are trying to tackle our world's most pressing problems, wicked problems, what I call them. We're going to go into that a little later. And I'm really interested in particular about collaboration and community building around those issues too. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I am so excited. And for all of you listeners, you should know Phillip and I go back a long way. He was a doctoral student. I had the honor of being on his dissertation committee where he looked at knowledge systems, which we'll talk about today. And we collaborate a great deal. So I'm excited to have this conversation about collaboration with you. And I'll just dive right in.
Yeah, we've got to be careful about not geeking out on the whole epistemology thing too. So we'll try to keep it like words people understand. So hopefully we won't go to it.
Viewers, we've already thrown out jargon, and epistemology is a theory of knowledge of who is a knower and what constitutes valid knowledge.
We're like three minutes into the conversation.
3 minutes in, we're already doing the ologies. So
yes.
I'm going to talk about collaboration, which is a little bit more of an accessible concept to people, and it's the heart of your chapter. So I want to ask you, the first question I have for you is, what first drew you to the idea of collaboration, and what has shaped it in your mind as a design challenge? So you talk in your chapter about collaboration as a design challenge. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that conceptualization and, you know, you're framing that it's not just a skill that people have or they don't have, but it's something that can be cultivated. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I think just to kind of answer that story, what really attracts me is, as a gratuitous plug to the book, is like really what the book is, I feel, is very rich, is that it represents kind of the dissertation journey of each one of the students and the contributors too. So it's really hard to go answer that question without kind of talking about my journey. So just if you permit me just a little bit to kind of step back quickly, but I mean, I think I entered the Penn CLO program. As I was telling you, my background has been around trying to tackle wicked problems, environmental, social justice, which are really complex, and they're becoming even more complicated. And I really kind of just was running into a world where it was shifting around me. The uncertainty is increasing. I know that's what you brought out in your chapter. And I just legitimately was watching all the stuff that I've been doing over the last 10, 20 years becoming undone, and really kind of grappling with like, what the hell what is going on here? And how do I function in this world? And what do I want to spend the next part of my life kind of doing? And I stumbled into the Penn Chief Learning Officer program, really looking for answers. And I remember distinctly, we go through these learning blocks. And so one of the first learning blocks is a leadership block. And we're talking about how to be a leader in this crazy world. And the person who was running the program at the time, I'll never will forget it because it was one of the most profound statements. We were talking about leadership and we were talking about professional development. And she said, you can't have profound professional development without profound personal development. And I always repeat that because I think that's worth saying. You can't be a great leader without profound, that's how I interpret it, without profound personal transformation. And I love this concept of transformation, right? It really stuck with me, and it became kind of my North Star as I was going through the learning blocks when we were researching stuff. And as you know, as a researcher, it's not long where you run into, okay, I love this concept, but what the hell is it that I want to transform? I mean, if I had my time of trying to help somebody develop or grow, what is it that I want to help them develop or grow? And that's kind of where we ran into our shared love of epistemology. And I won't walk people down that part too much, but really it is this kind of core concept that people have. We're not neutral when we come into experience. We're not neutral in how we experience and interact with the world, that we have these filters. That's how I love to hold it, of how we see and know and view the world. And that's really the whole core part. And that often lies outside of the unconscious, right? We just enter and we kind of on autopilot about how we're knowing and viewing the world. And as we interact both in our professional life and in our personal life, those are awfully unconscious. So when I talk about the design phase, it's trying to design opportunities to bring that unconscious into the conscious and make that the norm. And that's really what that's what really drew me to this particular interest and how that applies to collaboration, because I love to collaborate with people. I love community building. We'll talk about the need for that a little bit more sooner, but that's really what I mean about the design. How do you intentionally design bringing the unconscious into the conscious in a professional space?
It's powerful. And I know one of the keys is your framework of systems of knowing, which you talk about in your dissertation, of course, and then is featured in your chapter. So for listeners who haven't heard of systems of knowing before, what is that concept and how is it useful and important for leaders?
Well, this is where I like to kind of dialogue with you, because this is where our shared part about this, because this is about digging into the filters, and this kind of builds upon one of your also shared interests is invisible logic. So maybe I think the system of knowing expands on that a little bit more, but maybe let me get, admittedly putting you on the spot. I mean, maybe you start with your invisible logics and I could talk about how that expands with the systems of knowing.
Sure, I love that. And again, listeners, and viewers, we are working on a lot of different projects together. So you'll hear that underneath some of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So the invisible logics piece, I do agree. And as we both know, because we're working on a book together, our frameworks really come together very well. And invisible logics is a framework for understanding the individual leader, the team, and the organization or system as an ecosystem. So invisible logics are the ways that beliefs and values ultimately over time are transmuted into logics that an individual carries around, and that individual logics get sedimented in organizations and systems. Yeah. The thing about like your unconscious piece that you were just talking about is the invisible part of these logics, right? There are certain logics that we might even be aware of that exist in an organization, but it's the logics that people are not aware of, but that generate sets of rules and beliefs, even as they're invisible. And so people then are holding on to these rules and beliefs and policies and operating from them when they haven't even named the logic that's driving it. And so for me, understanding how invisible logics are driving decision-making, values, taken for granted norms in a place or of even one's professional or leadership practice, once we can identify them, excavate them, and foreground them, we can decide, are these still useful logics, or are these holdover logics from another time, another leader, another set of needs? And that is a really constructively critical process of understanding the logics that drive us. Are we aware of them? Are they useful? And if not, how do we sort of get rid of them and trade them out or trade them in for a new set of logics that can help us meet the moment?
I love it. That's such a powerful framework too. And as I'm experiencing us talking, I'm just, for those that are hitting the audio, you're missing some we're both hand talkers as well too. So there's a lot of great hand gestures going on here too. But I love your invisible logics framework too. The way that I hold that too is as we talk about how the invisible logics is a little distinct from the systems of knowing, is that I kind of see that more as on the individual level, right? We go back to these filters. I think an easy way to hold that is that we just all have these mental filters that are multiple filters of how we know and view the world. And that really determines how we experience and we show up in the world, right? Yeah. And so the systems of knowing is really just kind of saying that, okay, that happens on an individual level, but it also happens in a community level, right? Especially, I think some of the easiest ways to see this is around certain professions. Like we have these indivisible logics that get extrapolated to a larger profession, and it creates kind of a paradigm for how they know and view the world. And that could be both from a profession. It could also be from your intersectional identity, cultural, however, these kind of show up in multiple ways, which is why they're so complicated. And I think the best example that I continue to talk about it showed up in some of our work that we were doing. We was looking at a group here, and we were going in and exploring teams that were collaborating, and the teams were intentionally created with diverse backgrounds. So you had very different people coming from a different background, professional background, to collaborate on delivering a specific product. And I was interviewing the teams. And there was one team that was really having a challenge. And I was interviewing the researcher on this team. And it really became very clear that the researcher was having difficulty with the social entrepreneur in the group, because the researcher, researcher approaches a problem and sees a solution very differently than a social entrepreneur. And so you as a researcher know that, you have a set of standards. You're like, okay, whatever I'm doing, it needs to be, I'm very risk averse. I need to make sure that this has been peered, studied to death. I mean, I've got my examples. I've got, everything, and everything's set. And then I'm ready to kind of put this out. But a social entrepreneur, they really don't care. I mean, they test differently. It's about the end user, right? Mm-hmm. It's about beta testing. It's putting a product out there as quick, a minimum viable product, and putting this out there as fast as possible and testing and honing it. And so I was talking with the researcher, and she was explaining like what the social entrepreneur wanted to do was she wanted to do like what a social entrepreneur wants to do. Let's put out a product on the online, and let's just begin to test it. And I said, oh yeah, I was just trying to relate to her, right? I was saying, I think that's what she calls the minimum viable product. And she said, yeah, that's what she calls it in her profession. Yeah. But in my profession, we call that the least publishable unit. And she said it with, whoa, it was charged. And I took a step back, and I say that to you by just saying, look, it was very clear what's happening here is they're not disagreeing at a surface level. They're just fundamentally disagreeing by how they know and view and approach a problem. And it's causing, as you heard from that, a lot of tension in that stress. So what we're really trying to do with the systems of knowing and with that chapter is give people a language to keep the conversation from up here and have a language where you can address the core challenges down here. And that's really kind of what the systems of knowing is about, and just being aware of this particular issue.
I love this. I love your work. I think it has great import for organizations and systems. Could you walk us through, you began to, but could you walk us through like a hearty example of what happens when different systems of knowing collide in a collaboration that has targeted goals?
Yeah, well, I would say this, right? I mean, this is a really good example. So let's just say you are a leader, and you have clearly stated to them what you think the goal is, right? And this is the part that is so fascinating. You're saying, develop me a product. Basically, in this case, I think it was develop a product that is going to take the best research and put it into practical tools for families, parents to use in educating their children. And you have this, like, you've laid out everything. And that's really clear. And you think, oh, I've been clearly articulating the goal, so we're all on the same page. Well, you clearly hear that even when people come at it, they see it from a different angle. So the social entrepreneur has a different goal in this particular one. They want to make sure that their goal in their paradigm and their system of knowing is they want this, and I'm generalizing in this particular point, but they want whatever product to be as usable to the end user as possible. Like they want that to be now a researcher, I mean, that sounds great, but the researcher certainly wants to make that whatever they're creating is as close to the truth as possible, right? I mean, that's what they're really, and of course they have different processes. The social entrepreneur in this particular case wants to go and beta test. They like the minimum viable product. They like to put it out there and run. The researcher itself, they've got, wait a minute, has this been peer reviewed? I mean, do I have all my citations all lined up? I mean, this world, Sharon.
Different goals, right? Different goals, different ecosystem.
Different goals. So, and you as a leader think, oh, well, we all clearly have the same goal. And so I've articulated my job is done, but all these systems, the point is they all have different goals and different ways of attaining them that often go unstated. So you have this tension. So again, to answer your question, what would it look like if you went back and you had a conversation around, if you took it from like what happens here is what happens typically. I don't know how many collaborations you've been in, but here's my normal experience of collaboration is this conflict begins to happen. Collaboration begins to stop, and it's just about a power dynamic. That's right? It's like, how can I persuade other people to convince this other person? Or if I hold the power dynamic, I just start moving them out of this. And what happens is you start having even more negative feelings on this, or you start losing people's interest. Like the researcher in this particular one, there's only so long they're going to keep doing this, where they're eventually going to go, this isn't worth my time. I'm going to start mentally checking out. And then that's where the collaboration goes. But what would it look like if you just begin to say, okay, what systems are at play here? Let's talk about this. I mean, let's appreciate that each one of you are coming at this from a different angle, right? And what systems are actually needed in this particular space? Like, do we need, I mean, is it better to have the social entrepreneur system up front? Is it better to have the researcher, or can we find a combination? So in this case, I mean, what have you said? Like, okay, look, the challenge is that we might like the product, but how we're getting there is really challenging for us. So social entrepreneur, if you want to go out and beta test, let's just not put the researcher's name on this thing. Why don't you go out there under your banner and do what you need to do? And maybe the researcher is like, she's collecting data for you. So why doesn't she just bring it back and you start analyzing and do it? I mean, you see how that begins to free up a little different part as opposed to like just trying to wear somebody down that your idea is the right one and not having a language. And so that's really what fascinates me about this. And kind of as a leader, I just think we are in a space, our problems, as you wrote, are so challenging, so pressing that we don't really have the luxury of not being able to get this right.
That's right.
And not optimizing the creativity and innovation that's coming out of this collaboration. And if you don't have a language to do this and you keep getting stuck, I would argue that you're really not optimizing that collaboration.
Yeah, that's a really great point that, there was a little bit more latitude that we had in less coarse times to work things out, right? I mean,
one would think.
You're right. There's that layer of fat that we don't have that. There's no padding, there's no protection, and we just have a lot less wiggle room to get these things wrong, and the stakes are higher, right? And it reminds me, you have a great analogy about cooking that helps get underneath why leaders get stuck in these kinds of things. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I don't know how great it is, but I'm trying to, like, as we talked about, epistemology, I know this stuff gets complicated, so we're just trying to think of simple ways to say this. But I mean, I think this goes back to people were asking me about collaboration and how leaders kind of screw up collaboration. Here's kind of the best kind of story that I would say. And I just say that I cook, but I am a bad cook. I'm not a very good cook. This is not a subjective fact, and it doesn't hurt my feelings. It is an objective fact that my wife and kids agree on. And here's why. Because I just don't. I mean, I don't do a lot of learning. I mean, I kind of found like 5 ingredients that I like, and I'm a vegetarian. I'm a vegan, and so I basically have like garlic. I love garlic. I mean, I love Tony's. There's this really great soy sauce this soy sauce that I like, and there's a couple others. I won't bore you with all the details, but essentially it's this: no matter what dish that I'm cooking, eventually all 5 of those ingredients somehow just work their way into it, right? That's just what I know, I'm comfortable with, and I like it. And what happens is that I use kind of the same ingredients no matter what dish I'm making. And what happens is whatever turns out, it's like, it's not great, but it's not bad. It's very comfortable because I'm familiar with the ingredients. And so it just kind of is. And so I just don't ever have any incentive of trying to do it any better. And everything that I turn out with is just kind of like the same, basically, as what every dish that I cook. And that's what I argue like leaders are doing in this world, is that they basically have these kind of same ingredients, even if they know how, they don't have a mastery of these types of things. They throw them in no matter what the condition is or what kind of they think the project or collaboration is, they essentially throw the same ingredients in the pot. And it's not great. It's not terrible. It just kind of is. And they just kind of keep doing that over and over again. And again, what I think the point that we're trying to make here, and the point you so beautifully make in the first introduction to the chapter, is like, we just don't have that luxury anymore. I mean,
Right.
things are so crazy and so uncertain that we have to be able to get this part right. We have to be able to bring people together to be able to deliver on solutions and managing these solutions. And that's what's really critical. We really didn't talk about that a little bit, because I know you wrote about this in a chapter about uncertainty and moving from, I love all our acronyms, VUCA to BONIAM, which is even crazier. But I think
I'll define those for a minute. So we move from VUCA,
Yep.
context, vulnerable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, to BONI, to a BONI world, brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. Keep going. I just like to break down those acronyms.
Well, and I even like, I mean, you and I love the concept of the wicked problem, which is, and this is what drew
could
me.
you talk about that for a minute? How are you defining that, and can you give a couple of examples?
Well, this is kind of going back to my origin story of what brought me to the PennCLO program. I just didn't have a word for it, but this is what I was running into, that I was running into wicked problems, yet we were trying to apply the traditional management approach to these problems. And the concept of wicked, I won't bore you with it, but it's essentially that the problems are wicked because they are social by nature, that they affect so many stakeholders in so many different ways that we not only view the problem, the solution differently, but we view the problem differently. So this is why collaboration is so critical, because you know, if it's affecting all these stakeholders, you really need a language to be able to bring these stakeholders together, understand how they're viewing the problem differently, to begin to set up the solutions in a way that's going to be manageable and accepted by all of them. Because as we know, we just can't do that. I mean, it's in a lot of cases, like if you're manufacturing stuff, if there are places where you're doing repetitive and the problems are predictable, I mean, traditional management works. But when you're in a VUCA/BONI world, and it's changing on a daily basis, and you really have no idea what's happening 3 months from now, you can no longer apply that traditional management approach, and you can no longer ignore the collaboration approach. You really need to be able to address these things. And that's what I think is so beautiful and so critical about the book. I mean, sorry for the gratuitous plug, but I'm biased on this particular one. It's so needed now, you know?
And, you know, it's interesting because when you talk about, this is where your systems of knowing come in and where my invisible logics come in, right? That in that problem set you're talking about, people are making sense of these things with values and priorities that are not necessarily obvious to them. And so both of our frameworks, and when we combine them, it's really trying to help people get underneath what's driving their values, their priorities, their whatever they're viewing as a crisis. You know, what's the register? What's the mechanism by which they are indexing these things based on their own view of the world, right? And view of what matters and what's a priority. So I want to connect this.
Well, it's just Sharon, before you go on to that, one thing I love about that, because we know each other, and this was like what you introduced me to, was I love this concept of the 4 agreements too. And you brought this to me. I mean, what we were talking about is the invisible logics, the unconscious, that kind of extrapolate into the systems of knowing, these paradigms for both professional culture, produce these conscious, unconscious, these 4 agreements. I was hoping maybe you could speak to that, because I think that's a really approachable way for people to get their head around that. Please. I know you love to talk about this one.
I do. I love it. So shout out to Don Miguel Ruiz for his book, The 4 Agreements, which has been a game changer for me as a leader, and for the leaders I coach and do facilitation with in executive education. The premise of Miguel Ruiz's framework of the 4 agreements is, when we are small, you know, children coming up, the adults around us, whomever they may be, parents, guardians, caretakers, extended family, coaches, teachers, clergy, spiritual leaders, whomever is in our ecosystem, those people have an outsized influence on us.
Yes.
No one's fault. It's the way development happens, you know, human development. And we take on their agreements, meaning their priorities, the sets of social and personal arrangements, the ways they view good and bad. These are social contracts. These are ways that priorities and values became a set of rules for them, right?
Yeah.
And as young people, we ingest that. So whatever my parents think is good and bad, I come to think is good and bad. And I turn that onto myself as a moral code. And Don Miguel Ruiz's point is we do that before we're old enough or developed enough or individuated enough to be able to consciously make those agreements. So, for example, I talk to a lot of leaders who say, getting married early was a reflection of their parents' agreements and something that they did without even thinking about it. And some of them would say it worked out well for them, and others would say that it didn't. And it came later in their life that they had made a set of choices out of a conscious agreement. So too in their professional lives. You make a decision out of what you think is a conscious set of facts or concepts or the ways you're conceptualizing the facts. And in reality, it's a conditioned way of seeing the world. And so Miguel Ruiz calls it our domestication. And he says that it actually makes us go into, as individuals and as a society, a kind of socially conditioned, what he calls a trance, that you're not making as conscious decisions or living as conscious a life as you could be in your own values. And so what he argues is we have to replace agreements that we never realized we were agreeing to with a new set of agreements.
Yes.
And he offers 4 of them, right? He offers be impeccable with your word. Don't take things personally. What are the other 2? I have to remember in the moment what the other 2
That's
are.
okay. That's okay. Well, yeah, we're about putting you on the spot, so it's okay.
Is these agreements are something you can consciously, or these logics, I would argue, are something now you can consciously choose. And you can start doing away with some of the socialized beliefs. And when you think about that, so if that's every person, some of us become leaders. And so these unconscious agreements or these invisible logics or these systems of knowing are driving us, and yet they're not announcing themselves to us. We might not even be sure how they live inside of us, but we're actionizing them through our decisions and our choices. And so for our personal lives, Miguel Ruiz is saying, start to see and excavate them and make decisions. And when I'm saying in a professional life and in teams and in organizations and systems is we need to collectively do that. We need to do that as individual leaders, but we need to collectively think about how are different people's logics and systems of knowing over time sedimented into the institutional logics and functioning. And so the same thing Don Miguel Ruiz is arguing individuals can do to liberate ourselves. I'm saying people in institutions can come together through strategic collaboration to do that. We can actually look at what is unconsciously driving our decisions on this team or in this organization and some of the organizational values and beliefs that might not be serving us well anymore in 2026 and beyond.
It's so beautifully put too. And I think this is the aha for leaders that are listening too, because this is what ties the invisible logic. Like, okay, now that I know my invisible logic is of knowing now what, I mean, but it's what are the assumptions, what are the agreements that are being made in an organization is what kind of ties this all together and looking at them through this. So going back to our example, what systems of knowing are driving your organization, right?
Exactly.
If you're going back to collaboration, are you a 5-ingredient cook?
Exactly. And you're using those ingredients, whether the recipe needs them or not, and even if they make it less good, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing, right? These stale logics can lead us to make decisions that do not meet the moment correctly.
Exactly.
Moment correctly through the logics or through the systems of knowing, because we're taking them as fact, and they're not. They're subjective and they're conditioned. And if we can do through collaborative inquiry, sense-making, systemic sense-making about that, we can often see possibilities and decisions that weren't visible to us before. So it's very practical. This sounds very ethereal or very philosophical. It's actually very practical. It's what's driving me. And if I don't know that something's driving me and it has power over me, once I understand it, it no longer has that power over me because I'm conscious about it. I can name it and tame it and engage with it. And I think that that's a really important piece of that. And I want to connect that because a lot of this comes out of the challenges of the moment and the need to see strategy and meet challenges that are new. Like part of the book is, our statement, the era of precedent is over. And my argument is precedent as a decision-making strategy is a logic, right? Yeah. Precedent is no longer the right logic because we don't have precedented issues now. We have new kinds of issues. And so I want to ask you, in terms of issues and challenges, in your chapter, you really clearly identify 3 leadership challenges that show up when leaders don't design for these kinds of differences in their employee or in their workforce. So what are they, and what do these look like in practice, these challenges, and how leaders can view and address them?
Yeah, and we've talked about 3 of them. We've talked about a few of them already too, but let me just there. So it's about misaligned vision.
Yep.
It's about comfort zones, and it's about adaptation fatigue. Let me kind of talk about that. One is the misaligned vision is what I talked about earlier. Is often when you're in a collaboration, you feel like you've stated the goal and the objective for the group, but you see these different systems of knowing have different goals and different ways of obtaining those goals. And so it's beginning to have a language to be able to get from these these what appear to be surface level disagreements to these very deep disagreements about how we fundamentally know and view the collaboration and solution. So that's one. And I think it's just being aware of that and having a language and a process to be able to surface those as the norm. Again, bringing the unconscious to the conscious.
Yeah, that's right.
The other one was my terrible analogy of the cooking was the comfort zone, is that, again, we just continue to kind of do what we feel comfortable with.
That's
it's
exactly
about
right.
having new tools to take us out of that comfort zone. And I think it's, again, I'm really fascinated by this concept of, if we have these different systems of knowing, how can we begin to be creative with them? How can we begin to stack them to create new systems? How can we begin to fuse them to create new? And of course, we haven't even talked about AI as another system of knowing that's coming into the collaborative process. So how are these all interacting? And so we, again, going back to the 5 ingredients, we stay in that comfort zone and produce, innovation. It's kind of, that's okay. But what we really need is wow. We need some wow part of that. And so that's the part where we got to get out of our comfort zone and have a language where we're normalizing these systems of knowing, and we're trying to find ways to begin to, spark them, clash them. That's the part we want to do. And we want to have a language for that. And the third one that I thought was really fascinating in my research was, I call it adaptation fatigue, which is a little odd, but
I like that term.
It's this concept that if you are in a system of knowing, and the way that to wonk out just a little bit, but just to kind of take a step back, one of the ways that I looked at it was the system of knowing was defined by 3 things. It was the goal for the creating knowledge in your system, like I talked about, it's about, is the knowledge that I'm creating going to be usable to the end user? Is it going to be as close to truth as possible? Is it about persuasion and communication? It could be anything. And then, of course, you have qualities about that goal. That was the second one, right? And it was about, okay, as we talked about with you as a researcher, it needs to be peer review. It needs to be, I have low risk, man. I have a low tolerance for risk. It needs to be cited. It needs to be peer reviewed. And you have processes. We're coaching dissertation students through how to create a literature review and how to do citations and how to do qualitative research. There's essentially the PennCLO program. The whole thing could be summarized best as an entrance, as an orientation to the system of knowing of what it is to be a scholar practitioner. So anyway, there's 3 things. And what I found when I looked at people in the collaboration is they are adaptable if you take one or begin to take 2 of them away. But if you start getting into, the 2 or 3 and changing their system of knowing, then that starts really creating not only tension, but a lot of negative emotions for them. There is people are adaptable, but only to a certain extent. And I think as you're leading a collaboration, you just have to be aware that you're asking some people to adapt more than others in the system. If there is a dominant system in that, and there are other people with different systems, they might be asked to adapt. So as an example, again, going back to my old research, when I was looking at all the 5, they had 5 different disciplines that were in the collaboration. Well, became very clear because it was about evidence-based. Boy, the researcher in that one was loving every researcher outside of this. Sorry, the one I mentioned was loving this collaboration. But the other ones, especially ones that were having to adapt more than one or two of the qualities about their system, man, that's where a lot of tension comes in, and that's a really source for negative emotions and a lot of conflict, both within the collaboration and can be, taken into the rest of the organization itself if you don't manage it correctly. And that's really kind of the key. Those are the challenges. It's about misaligned visions, understanding that even if you articulate one, you have multiple competing visions based upon the systems of knowing. It's about staying in that comfort zone. Again, not having tools to know how to just stop being a 5-ingredient cook and cooking what's actually demanded of the situation. And then 3, just being aware that people are flexible, but to a certain extent.
That's a really good point. Now, I have a question. So if I'm a leader, I'm listening right now, and I recognize myself in all of this, what should I actually do differently starting today?
Well, I mean, I think they should reach out to you and I to help them with this one. That's first and foremost. And I mean, again, or read the book. Again, another gratuitous plug. But outside of that, I think it's really just beginning what you and I are saying. It's using these frameworks to make the unconscious conscious in yourself. I mean, I know leadership, a core part of leadership is self-reflection. And I think this is a critical part. I think it's also making sure that you're investing in the commitment. Often what happens in this one is it really, there really aren't any ulterior motives or bad people in this. It really is about trying to move at a pace. And so there is an investment in commit time on this one to get it right. It's much easier to use your power dynamics to get to a decision that people are going to either accept but not quite optimize the creativity and innovation. So it's about investing in time. And I think it's just, again, being intentional. If you have these agreements that we talked about, if you can surface what agreements that you're making about yourself and your organization, are those the agreements you want? And if not, what does it look like to change those? And I think that's an intentionality that leaders have to really have in this world where we're living, from VUCA to Bonnie to wicked problems and everything else.
I strongly agree. Which leads me to my next question, which is, in all of this, one of your key arguments is that the process matters as much as the product. And so I think for some leaders, that's really hard to accept. And how would you help a leader try to understand that and understand the changes, or what changes, when they do?
Yeah, I think that really comes from my going back to my research was because what I did was I actually researched all these teams, and there were multiple teams with people with different backgrounds, and they all had to do a product. So they actually had, after a time, they actually got to go present the products. And I mean, this is no disparaging remark on the products that they created, because they were amazing. But the behind the scenes was way cooler. Like how they got there was really cool. And I think that, if you get, and what I found is if you get so focused on the actual product, you lose focus of actually the process to actually get there. And when you lost steam and when you lost innovation, because I would argue that the products that were presented, there was a lot of choices and decisions that could have made those even better had they been explored. And again, this goes back to, look, as a leader, this is something that is a non-negotiable. You need a process for collaboration, and you need to understand that, much like you would understand any product line or any manufacturing that you're trying to do. You want to understand what that assembly line looks like so you can begin to hone and tweak it, refine it, have your own processes. So that's what I'm thinking about, the intentionality, and in particular about focusing on the process and getting a strong process down and articulated that so you can hone, tweak it, and make it better. Again, because as we go back to what you argued in your first one, we no longer have the luxury of not doing this right. We really have to begin to get this right. And it starts by being intentional, and that intentionality starts with understanding a clear process so you can develop one that works for your organization.
So given all of your different projects and groups you've worked with, and given this chapter, your work, your scholarship, as we close this out, what are some words of advice you have for leaders really trying to meet this moment? What would you say to them beyond what you've already shared?
Yeah, I think I would start off with just acknowledging that you really have, and I think leaders are already doing this, but you have to develop multiple skills. I mean, you have to rely on not only the traditional management for things that you know how, but you have to really begin to build in new approaches, these adaptive practices around collaboration for problems that you don't know how to do. And I think what's really exciting for leaders is there really are some great frameworks and ideas that are coming out that are tested in organizations that give you that language and framework to do. And I really, again, I know it's a gratuitous plug in ways, but I really do think the introduction that you lay in making the case for what's happening in our book and why leaders should pay attention to it. And of course, a shout out to all of my chapter colleagues, because each one of those chapters is so rich in addressing this particular problem. They represent what it could be a 3 or 4 year journey in the dissertation through the Executive Chief Learning Officer program. So again, I know it sounds like a gratuitous plug. I don't really mean it that way, but it's there. That's why we put all this hard work and effort into it. And I think I would really pay attention to the wisdom that's in the book and the wisdom certainly that you and Raghu, Sharon, started with in the introduction about why leaders need to think about this differently. And then I think that the chapters are so rich by how to do that in a practical way. Again, remember, what the program that we are and that you teach and what you've driven home to us is that we're not pure academics. We're scholar practitioners.
Exactly.
This isn't academic stuff that that hasn't been applied. This is what's actually happening in the real world. And what's the evidence, the current evidence that's backing it to help you do it better. And that's why I feel like this is so rich, and why I would really implore leaders to explore those concepts and certainly reach out.
I'm glad you included that, because I do think one of it's invisible to us in a way because it came out of the program that we were all, we're all in, is in fact the role of research for the leader. And I think we could close out on that when leaders understand how to do research well and efficiently, right? So you all did these dissertations, and that is a whole, odyssey into research. But for the leader who's not doing an executive doctorate, I think each of you makes a great case for the kinds of real-time data that leaders can collect to actually understand these issues efficiently in the flow of work, while they're running the engines. And I would argue that one of the things that your chapter does, and I think that the book does really well, and certainly that the CLO program does really well, is it helps leaders understand how research is a tool and how research can be an effective and efficient and a catalytic and generative tool to understanding their problems in real time. And so the kinds of data that are talked about are that you could call them flash data, you could call them real-time data, you could call them just-in-time data. What they are is data that helps us understand what's the snapshot of the ecosystem right now. How do we take that to inquiry through processes of systemic sense making and end up somewhere better based on our own homegrown data, not based on external metrics, though we can compare our homegrown data to those. And so I just want to say I appreciate you ending us out on leader scholars, because I do think that is one of the most compelling positionalities a leader can take up, is as the lead learner or the lead inquirer or the lead scholar or researcher of practice in ways that look different than, die-in-the-wool academic research. They look like real-time informing practice. So I want to thank you for your chapter, because I think it really helps us think about how our systems of knowing as leaders and on teams and in organizations and systems really drive the ways we collaborate and relate, and how all of that can help us really meet our goals, meet the moment, meet our purpose, and create ecosystems that truly scaffold and support people in humanizing ways. So I'll give you the last word to close us out however you'd like to.
I would just leave with the tagline here. I mean, great collaboration doesn't happen. It's design, and as a leader, that design is in your hands. And really appreciate the time, Sharon.
That.
Always wonderful to talk with you.
You
Hope
too,
this was
Phillip.
helpful to the people that were listening.
Many things when we talk. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your chapter. Thank you for all the mentoring you do in the program. Thank you for how you supported Raghu and I in this book. You really were our third arm. And thank you for being you. I really appreciate your spirit and your soul and your brilliance as a leader and as someone who supports leaders. So thank you. And I really can't wait to see this go live.
Me neither.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. Thank you for listening to us today. We're very passionate about this, and we hope that you'll take one or two things along with you that will be useful to your leadership and your organization. Thank you. Take care.